Welcome to the Resilient Campus Podcast, amplifying the voices of college inclusion innovators. I'm your host, Sabby Labor, founder and CEO of Resilient Campus. Join me each week as I interview professionals on the front lines of campus and community movement building. For more information, please visit resilientcampus.com/podcast. This is episode number 7 of the Resilient Campus Podcast. Today we're speaking with Bree Sérráno from Cal Poly Pomona. Bree is currently a Ph.D. student in the Higher Education Leadership Program at Colorado State University, and their research interest is on the resiliency among transgender, undocumented students of color. They serve on the executive board of the Consortium of Higher Education, LGBT Resource Professionals as the People of Color Co-Chair, and the NASPA Gender and Sexuality and the Latinx AO Knowledge Community as the Latinx Inclusion Co-Chair. Bree has 2 academic chapters being published in early 2018 and consistently presents regionally and nationally on LGBTQ, Latinx, and trans identities. Bree, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited about this.
Awesome. Happy Friday as well.
Yes, happy Friday. Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but happy Friday for me.
So, Bree, I know that bio was just a little snapshot. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Southern California, all over the place. I don't really have a hometown necessarily. So I've been living here pretty consistently, but I did have some points to where I was living in the East Coast. So I attended the Pennsylvania State University for my master's, and I worked at Swarthmore College for a year afterwards, which allowed me to live in Center City, Philadelphia. I've also lived in New York City, so I really enjoyed traveling, and I enjoy traveling for work and for conferences and presentations that I do. Other than that, I'm a very avid fan of Game of Thrones and video games, as well as the show The Office. So I really appreciate Netflix, too.
Excellent. Yes, I've heard a lot of cutie pock people Netflixing as a practice of self-care, and Game of Thrones is definitely in my repertoire as well. I love me some Jon Snow.
Right? And we gotta wait a year and a half now for the next season. So,
oh, no.
We'll just play the waiting game.
Yeah, there was a great article that just came out, and it casted basically the Black Game of Thrones, and it was this really beautiful array of actors who were African or African American, and it was just like, yeah, that makes sense. That, the characters that they played in the past, so it was this really beautiful, diversifying of this show that has a lot of white folks on it.
Yeah, it does.
So, Bree, tell us, which identities are the most salient for you today?
I would say there's a decent amount, especially given what's happening nationally right now and what took place in Charlottesville a few weeks ago. And so for me, I think currently with the work that I do, and I think in my everyday life, I do identify as non-binary and queer. And so I think folks read me a certain way or they misgender me, which, happens. And so for me, I think those are pretty salient, and also identifying as Latinx and being a person of color, I really strongly am proud of who I am and what I do, and I really hold that high in regard to what my ancestors have experienced and what's gotten me to where I am now. I also do have anxiety and major depression, and so for me, that impacts my life in a lot of ways, and it also teaches me how to manage obstacles and in ways that I don't think I could have done otherwise if I didn't have that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like, in the work that you're doing, I imagine that comes up with students as well, and in terms of what they're going through in regards to mental health, identities and experiences, and the history of, their communities as well, their ancestors. So that's all fantastic, experience, and, and just super, how we embody this work is really important to how we can impact the lives of students and often colleagues, right? So thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing today around inclusion and social justice work at Cal Poly Pomona.
Yeah, so I think I'm going on to my second year. It'll be my second year here in October 12th. And so we've done a lot of good work, and I say we because the president of the university has done a lot, and so has the staff and colleagues that I work with. So more recently, I did do a presentation to the president's cabinet on campus and talked a lot about trans inclusion and policy that can continue to progress on campus, and also our achievements and comparisons with other campuses that are also Cal State universities. And then I will be presenting to the Dean's Council later this month in regards to trans inclusion and how faculty can continue to be supportive of transgender students on campus. And so a lot of what I've been doing has been around trans populations, and not to say that LGBTQ students are not important. I just know that there's a lot of support that our trans students can use in regards to, abiding by the state laws in the state of California and having the federal guidelines repealed earlier this year by Trump. So I think it's really important for them to be always included in the narrative and awareness of how we can create a more inclusive campus. And so, yeah, I just think that's really important, and I try to provide the best services that I can for students along with my colleagues in the university.
That's amazing. And so if folks listening into this podcast are really starting on this journey or trying to figure out how to build on the momentum that they already have around trans inclusion on their campus, can you name maybe one or two of those policies or practices that they could, in a sense, emulate on their campus or talk about with their leadership at their institution?
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit. I would say that the ones that I'm more focused on, I think, more recently is for hormones being offered on campus and being prescribed to students, and also with preferred name. And that's not just for students, but also having the opportunity for faculty and staff. And so currently we're in our testing phases for a preferred name for students, and so they can contact me or other folks, and I can direct it towards the registrar. And so that is great that we're currently offering that and looking to expand it more in the future, because a lot of the time when rosters come up in class or faculty may accidentally dead name a student or misgender them. And so I think those are really important because they're kind of the small details but make a very large impact on students.
Mm-hmm. And I know one of the other hats that you wear currently is you're a doctorate student, right? And so Tell me, how does that show up in your doctorate program? Like, are they talking about trans inclusion? Do they have that one diversity course? Or are they really making radical the notion of like more comprehensive curriculum around this? Are you leading those conversations? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think in my program there's starting to be a shift with new co-directors of the program. So Dr. Susana Munoz is one of my advisors, and Dr. D.L. Stewart just came on as a faculty member and will be a co-advisor for me as well. And so I know both of them are very intentional around promoting social justice and awareness throughout the entire curriculum and not just in one class necessarily. So, for example, I'm currently taking a student development class with Dr. Susana Munoz, and she has infused a lot of social justice in everything that we read. So it's not your traditional green book type of identity course, which there's nothing wrong with that. And she's also very mindful of the student identity development that is intersectional for our students, and we consistently talk about privilege. And so for me, it's not necessarily me just leading the conversation, but I feel like my colleagues are definitely grasping that are in my cohort. And I think this summer we took a summer class, and that really set it up of me introducing myself and talking about cisgender privilege and expectations that I have of my colleagues in supporting myself, and also being conscious of students and faculty and staff that they're serving and working with.
That's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like they're kind of innovating in ways, whether they're small or large, around like representation of faculty, infusion of that, social justice lens into the curriculum that I know a lot of graduate programs really struggle with in higher ed administration and leadership. So that's fantastic. And I know that your program is in Colorado. How does that work for folks? I mean, if anybody listening in on this podcast is interested in pursuing a graduate degree, like what made you decide on that program, and any advice for folks that might be thinking about that pathway?
Yeah, so I think the whole process for me applying and considering applying with my material took a good 6 to 8 months, especially having to take the GRE. That's always a fun one. And so for me, I was really looking at a lot of different schools. Colorado State actually was not my first choice. But what happened was I did the math on the convenience of the program. So basically, I take 2 classes a week, and they're both on the same day, and it starts at 4 o'clock, ends at 5:30, and then the second class starts at 6 and ends at 7:30. And then I have to have a sub-cohort group meetings to get our work done. And so it's just convenient for me to be able to do it at home or from my office if it's after hours, or just not even having to drive in traffic or having to worry about parking and walking somewhere. And so it's kind of similar to a Google Hangout. We actually use Zoom.
Okay.
And so we take 2 classes in the spring and 2 classes in the fall, and then over summer we take one intensive class where we read for it ahead of time, and then we're there in person in residency for one intensive week. And so we also do a residency piece in January for about 2 days on campus. And so that's just to set us up for success of what's coming with the program for the next year or so as we continue our studies. And so it's very convenient. It's a smallish cohort. There's about 12 students. And the faculty, like I said, that they've recruited are phenomenal. And Oyan Poon actually just also came on
nice.
as a faculty member from Chicago. And so I think that these new faculty are going to really set the precedent for what PhD programs should be like. And so for me, I was really concerned about convenience, time management, what faculty are going to support my research. And so knowing DL and Susanna, they both specialize in the research that I want to do. So it just seemed like a perfect fit for me.
Amazing. Good. Thanks for sharing all that. I think it's important, that we see each other going through these programs and that we can talk about even some of the logistics. And then, it's like, why did you choose this program? There's so many out there. There's a lot of hybrid programs that are out there now. And then what makes this program distinctive from the next is sometimes hard to really sift through when you're just working with their website or, talking with an admissions person or something, or a representative from their program. So I think it's good that we're talking about this.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and it was something that I definitely had my eye on for a long time, of getting a PhD, and so I just want to be able to also have that flexibility of potentially becoming a faculty member as well. And not to say you can't do that with the EDD, I just wanted to go more of the research route to know exactly what I was getting myself into.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big conversation in the field, right? The PhD versus the EDD. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. And so Bree, how would you say that you arrived to the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so it's been somewhat of a journey. So for me in college, Cal State Fullerton at the time, there wasn't an LGBT center. There was only a club on campus, and so I was in the closet throughout my college experience, and so I didn't come out until I was in grad school. And I would give a lot of credit to Allison Subasic from Penn State and Dr. Sue Rankin, who was a great mentor of mine, that really helped me understand queer theory and queer studies and knowing who I am as a person. And so for me, that really opened a lot of doors in being a grad assistant for the LGBT Center on campus at Penn State. And so that was my first kind of taste of doing LGBT work and what is it like to educate folks who are in rural, middle of nowhere Pennsylvania on LGBT issues and racism and undocumented students and whatever else you may have. And it was just a phenomenal experience to be able to see that, because growing up in Southern California, it's just very metropolitan, very quote-unquote diverse, right? And it was just a very different type of education that happened at Penn State. And so I started from there and then went on to Swarthmore College, working at the Intercultural Center for about a year, serving a variety of student populations, since it's a small liberal arts. And after that, I got the position at Cal State Fullerton of being their first LGBTQ services coordinator, about 70% of the time, in advising students in student government. So I really enjoyed that and giving back to my alma mater. And then I applied for Cal Poly when I thought it was a permanent position, because previously I was on contract for ASI at Fullerton. And so I just took advantage of it, and I'm here now, and I think the center has come a good ways and made some progress with the help of colleagues on campus. So I'm really happy about where we're at right now.
Excellent. And I've heard from a lot of graduate students and newer professionals that are really trying to break into intercultural and multicultural roles or gender-based roles, looking to be LGBTQ Resource Center directors and coordinators. Do you have any advice for them if they're thinking of, if that's their next step or it's in their future? Is there anything they can do to add to their resume or, any places to network that you really suggest to help them kind of get to that next step so that they can be in those roles to make the impact that we know that they'll have?
Yeah, I know that the Consortium of Higher Ed does have a lot of good resources. I think the challenge with LGBT work is that there's only about 250 centers throughout the entire nation, and that's over 4,400 public or private institutions. And so the chances of actually securing a position is really challenging, but I would say even when I was in Philadelphia, for example, I worked at Swarthmore College, and it was serving a lot of different students, not just LGBT students, but I took advantage of the community LGBT center and volunteered, a few hours a week. And so I still kept doing the work and being within the community in other ways. So even if it's through nonprofits or online and being a hotline, somebody who answers the hotline, right, for let's say the Trevor Project or any other nonprofit who does that work. And so just even if you or folks are interested in doing that from a distance, I think there's still potentially opportunities there, at least with nonprofits, and to have a taste of the community and be able to add that to their resume.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love the consortium. I think that, I did an internship with them at UC Riverside when I was in my grad program.
Oh, cool.
And lived on campus there and worked with Nancy Tubbs and Toy Thibodeau.
Oh, Nancy.
Yeah.
I love Nancy.
Love me some Nancy and Toy. They're amazing, and it's like those kind of opportunities, even though, I will say, looking at it through an intersectional lens, it's when you think about how to finance grad school and how to even take that time away to be in a paid or volunteer type of internship, there's like these temporary sacrifices we have to make, and they're easier for some and really more challenging or nearly impossible for others. And so I think that's a conversation that, we're continuing to have in the field. There's fewer positions. How do you get to them? It's kind of this murky, individualized process of like mentoring. And so I'd love to make that clearer for folks that, we know will be amazing in these roles. And I would love to see more of these roles on campuses, right? That is important.
Yeah, and I think this sounds terrible, and a colleague of mine shared this with me the other day. They're like, after Trump was elected, they felt like there's more job security for us. So I think, if anything, there will hopefully be a continual progression of more positions nationally or centers opening or whatever there may be, because I'm not sure where the climate's going or going to continue to go. And so I think, if anything, there's more of a need for these spaces and professionals now more than ever.
Absolutely. And I know that my last conversation with Nancy was that Nancy's trying to get together the community colleges in California to talk about LGBTQ services and what does that look like and what can it look like and what does it mean when we all come together and we collaborate and kind of co-conspire, if you will, to do this work, because working in our silos, working in these different campuses, even if we're in the same system of colleges, doesn't necessarily mean we have this like synergy of effort and resources. So I'm really excited about that work, because community colleges are often the most under-resourced when we think about, they don't have centers, or they're less likely to have centers. I think we only have a couple in the nation. And, how do they build that infrastructure from the ground up almost?
Yeah, no, it's challenging for sure.
And so when I think about, how we develop holistically as professionals, as people, as human beings, I know that I run across great books and podcasts and things that are really shaping and influencing the minds of people that I admire, such as yourself. And so I'm interested in, what are you reading? What are you listening to? Or what's that resource that informs the way that you approach your work that you can share with folks listening in?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I will always attempt to do my best to live by my own ethics and values, and I think a lot of that is reflected in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, the book. And so I genuinely valued what I took from that book, and I actually read it in undergrad, and we were also required to read it in my master's program, but I read it in undergrad when I was taking Chicano studies classes. And so in it discussing around liberation and what does that look like if there's a revolution, and tips on not becoming the oppressor or flipping it, and when those who are underserved or underrepresented become those in power, what does that look like of not perpetuating oppression to others or continuing that, and having more equitable voices among people, and also recognizing our own privileges and attempting to be conscious as much as possible of those and how does that impact others. And so that book has always stayed near and dear to my heart, and I haven't read it too much recently, but it's definitely one of those that inspires me and motivates me to continue to do the good work, and also recognizing social institutions that perpetuate oppression, and what does that mean for me as being a part of one of them.
Absolutely. Amazing. And you know what's funny is that Dolan from UC Santa Barbara, who is our guest for episode number 6, actually recommended Pedagogy of the Oppressed as well. Yeah. So they were like all about it. And so I love that.
Yeah, I love them.
Great. Awesome. And so I know this is a big question, but what has been the biggest lesson that you've learned in your professional life?
Oh, God. I struggle with this because I call myself a realistic pessimist. Okay. I try not to be too pessimistic, and I think that also comes with my neurodiversity. I think for me, the one thing that I don't feel like is really teachable necessarily until you practice it is around politics in higher ed. And so I think specifically for me, doing LGBT work is around identity politics and navigating my own ability to bring myself authentically to work, and the work that I do as an educator of who I am, my values and ethics, that I'm comfortable with making decisions or doing specific practices, and at the end of the day, I'm good with that. And so I think it's sometimes challenging when doing this type of work, and maybe other folks can relate who have done any type of identity center work, especially if they identify with the population, is that not taking advantage of, but I think using my resources and networks to be able to advocate when maybe I can't, right? Or maybe when I'm preaching to the chorus, or maybe when folks can see me in a certain way because I am trans and I am a person of color, and so hopefully having other folks using their agency and their positions of power to also do the good work. And so I think that's something that's just learned by practice, and in no way have I mastered that, and I don't know if I ever will in my career, but I do notice that that's pretty salient for me, and I have to consider, how do I serve students, and also how do I continue to do good work in my position and be here long-term and make long-term impact, and who do I need to talk to, or what table do I need to be at, and if I can't do that, then who is there that I could advise. Does that make sense?
It does. And that was going to be my next question, and thinking about, this idea about agency and leveraging your own privilege and access to these tables where decisions are made, where, they're shaped and influenced and they originate. How do you, when you're working in these, higher ed institutional structures that can be very complicated, that can be very siloed, and what are those strategies, or what are those skills or behaviors that folks who are leaders in your organizations that you're working with, how do they support you? Like, how do they help you to feel that you have agency in the work that you're doing, that you have impact, that your voice is heard, that you're at the tables that you need to be? Like, what are some of those practices that people do to support you in your movement along your goals and pathway and in your daily work? Like, how do they support you in that work?
I think, first of all, just affirming me and who I am and recognizing me for who I am is really important. I think also taking what I say not as a grain of salt, but acknowledging that these are challenges for students, and this is more of a community, university-wide effort that needs to happen to support our students and staff and faculty. I think providing opportunities for me and my colleagues to educate folks who are in senior level administration. So, for example, with the President's Cabinet presentation that I did, it was the President herself who said, I want this to happen. with my cabinet. And so from there, I talked to the provost, and I'll be speaking to the dean's council, like I said. And so I think having leadership who recognizes and affirms positive impact and positive work that folks are doing on the ground. And so I benefit from that, and I recognize that that's a lot of privilege that I have. And so for me, it's being also very intentional about the way that I frame the work that we're doing here on campus and how we're continually progressing, and that we know that the work isn't done, and being realistic about outcomes, right? And so when folks want things to be done overnight, it just may not happen that way. And I think it depends on the type of institution too. So like a small private may operate in a very different way than a large public from where I'm at, and get things done a lot faster. So just acknowledging and recognizing the processes, while it can be occasionally frustrating, it's also realistic, and knowing that the work will get done, hopefully at some point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks so much. I know that, it's at different points in our careers, it's really interesting to like kind of reflect on those types of questions, because like you're saying, they shift so much. Like if we are in a private, small organization versus a large public, potentially with a different, more focused mission academically or socially, like what does that mean for us in our role? So I appreciate that you adding context to that.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a question that came up, and I know that we didn't talk about it previously, but I'm thinking about all the different leadership engagements and volunteer work that you're doing right now. Can you talk about, you're involved with the consortium, you're involved with NASPA, you're in a doc program, like why do you do it all? How do you balance it?
Sometimes I ask myself that question. I like to keep busy, and I think some of it has to do with my anxiety. Like I always have to be doing something productive, and so maybe that's not the most healthy thing, but I also make sure that I make time for myself. And so I do frequently see my family, and I see my friends that are very close with me, and I spend quality time with them. And these are folks that do not have a higher education, or folks who maybe work in a different functional area in higher ed if they do, or maybe have a different educational background. And so for me, I think the work that I do is very motivating, and that I know at some point it will create change. And the way that I see my work is not to change people's minds overnight, but it's to plant a seed. And if that causes somebody to think critically about their actions and create a more positive climate for people in general society, on campus, or with their family or friends, or whatever it may be, to me that's a big win. And so I do my best to support and educate folks, and whether that be through professional organizations, or through my NUF mentee, or my volunteer work that I do on the side. And so I just think it's important for me to live and breathe my values, because for me this is all intertwined with my personal life as well, because of my lived experience. And so I can't ignore that or move past that. Like I think there's always work to be done. And so when it comes to my doctorate as well, and I'm going to be honest with you, with my doctorate, I have a great sub-cohort group to where we support each other in the readings and the writings and doing group projects. And so I think if I didn't have as supportive as a sub-cohort, I would be doing a lot more work. Let's just put it that way. And so I think we work very well together, and I appreciate that. And the same thing with colleagues. And if you notice on my leadership titles, that a lot of it is co, and I really appreciate having co-chairs that do work with me, because we can lean on one another or step in when we need to for one another, because it's hard to take on something as just an individual, but I feel like it's more so community care with each other.
That's fantastic. No, I love knowing that, and knowing how you're practicing self-care. Like before we got on the call, we were talking about how often you work out and how much I aspire to even doing half of that, regimen.
You can do it. It just becomes a habit. Honestly, like now my body automatically wakes up at like 5:40, and it's like, what are you doing? Why aren't you at the gym? And so it just becomes habit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another big question is thinking about, how we mentor peers, how we can mentor up and mentor future folks in these professional pathways. What's that one piece of guidance that you would give to professionals that are doing equity, inclusion, and social justice work in today's higher ed environments?
I think it's okay to recognize we get really tired. Like, this work can be very draining and exhausting, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. I just know for me, I'm actually an introvert, and a lot of people don't know that. But at the end of the day, when I go home, I just check out, and I do what I need to do to reinvigorate myself. And so some of that comes with me being an introvert and like a hermit in my apartment and not socializing with people. But sometimes it also means that I just need to touch base with my family, like my community. And for me, what's really caused me to persevere through higher ed, and especially me being a first-generation student, is connecting with folks that are similar to myself. And so I just want to give a big shout-out to my cutie Latinx community that I have, Maya Cardenas and Marcela Ramirez, Abran, Manzon, and a lot of other folks that have supported me through years of moving forward, and through Pulse Nightclub, and through doing equity work similarly that I do, and I could bounce ideas off of, or just call them, or just go out and get a drink with them. Like, it's just hardcore community care that has really allowed me to thrive and survive in doing this type of work. And so it's just nice to be able to be in a space and be my authentic self, and also know that folks understand where I'm coming from in doing this work and the challenges that could arise from it.
That's amazing. And so, Bree, what can we look forward to from you? I know that you're planning and plotting and on this like really amazing pathway. What's up for you next? Like, what's a big project that you're working on, or something that you're envisioning will happen here in the future for you?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm having a couple book chapters being published next year. So that's out of my hands right now. I'm done with that. That's a lot of work. In October, and thank you, in mid-October, I will be presenting at Princeton, and so I'm going to be featured in their Latinx Heritage Month sessions and workshops, and talking about the experiences of LGBTQ Latinx undocumented students, and also talking more about undocumented services and policies and what's specifically come out of California, which I think is kind of a pioneer in doing that work throughout a lot of universities that we have, and also recognizing that the decision being made on DACA could happen this weekend or within the next week. And so I'll be presenting at Princeton October 13th, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm very open to seeing where that takes me, and being able to connect with the community there.
Amazing. Yeah. That is fantastic. And, we really are on the edge of our seats trying to see what happens with DACA, and we'll see where the weekend takes us. Yeah, I mean, it's real. I mean, today, like, we are having just this rapid decline in human rights in our nation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, there's not much you could say about it, right? It is what it is, and it's tough. And so I'm just sending positive energy to all the folks who are currently and potentially being impacted by that decision, and from what's been happening, the past few years nationally, that we've become more aware about.
Yeah. Has your institution or the system been engaged in conversations about the what if scenario? If DACA does go away, then how do campuses and the system respond?
We haven't talked about that much. I've talked to my colleague who does undocumented student services here on campus, and so it's just trying to talk to lawyers and seeing what can happen moving forward if that were to happen. The university itself hasn't said a statement, which doesn't mean that they won't. But I think it's going to be definitely trying to figure out what's going to happen with our students, because they come back. I'm on the quarter system, if folks weren't aware of that, but they come back in about 3 weeks. And so, there's going to be some preparation that we have to do before they return if that decision is overturned.
Absolutely. Good. I mean, it's really, I think California is, like you said, doing really pioneer work in this area of supporting undocumented students. And it's really quite different. I'm here in Minnesota now, and it just looks so differently around how we do that work and how we engage. And I'm so glad that I got my start in the California environment, like in LA, working with undocumented students, because you really, I don't know, a lot of different layers are added, but you see kind of how people go into a grassroots model of supporting students who often are in fear of coming out and making it public that they are undocumented or their parents are undocumented. And And so how we kind of provide those wraparound services from a grassroots model is, as a much more slower approach to helping those students realize change and success in these pathways. And it's like, I hope that we don't have to revert to that, because although it was a really radical model, it is so slow, and the students, they don't know where to find you. And, it's almost, we almost go back into hiding, and our students go back into hiding, and their families go back into hiding.
Yeah.
If they're not already, right? I mean, I'm not naive to think that the threat of deportation is not real for, at this moment as we talk.
Yeah, for sure.
So Bree, as we close out and people would love to add you to their network, what's the best way that folks can connect with you?
Yeah, I'd recommend you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not as active on Twitter. That's mostly my workout stuff that I post. But I would definitely recommend folks connect with me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. And maybe I'll have to follow you on Twitter so that I could get inspired to work out and develop that habit. Nice. Well, Bree, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you. And this has been just an inspiring conversation just to hear about the work that you're doing and the lens that you bring, the impact that you're having. It's really amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And yes, feel free to connect with me at any time, everyone.
So, Bree, I want to close out with an inspirational quote. And thank you so much for providing this quote today from Emiliano Zapata. Emiliano Zapata says, "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees." To all those listening in, thank you so much for all that you do. I truly appreciate you. Stay resilient. Thanks so much for tuning in. Head on over to iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on a single episode.